Imagine stepping back in time to 1963, to a quiet neighborhood in St. Paul, Minnesota. Picture a place where families knew each other, Kids played outside after school, and life seemed simpler. That's where this story begins, with a seemingly ordinary housewife named Carol Thompson, whose life was tragically cut short. You asked us to delve into the morbid podcast episode MRBEP 627, Murder of Carol Thompson, adful.mp3, to unravel the mystery surrounding her murder. It's a tale of deception, betrayal, and a conspiracy that will leave you wondering just how well you know those around you.
What's so captivating about this case is how it shatters the illusion of that picture-perfect 1960s life. Exposing the dark secrets lurking beneath the surface, Carol Thompson's murder sent shockwaves through her community, revealing a web of lies and a conspiracy that would leave everyone stunned.
The podcast does a great job of introducing us to Carol. She was a beloved mother of four, active in her community, always striving to learn new things. She was a den mother, a Brownie troop leader, taught kindergarten, and even sang in the church choir. She seemed to embody the ideal housewife of the era, but whispers of an unhappy marriage and a close friendship with a man known as Big Red, Kenneth Morin, suggest there might have been more to Carol's life than met the eye.
That detail about Kenneth Morin is crucial. It introduces the possibility of a motive that goes beyond a random act of violence. Could this friendship have been a source of tension in her marriage? Was Carol seeking something she wasn't finding at home? These are questions that investigators would soon grapple with as they delve deeper into the case.
The podcast then takes us to the crime scene. And let me tell you, it was a gruesome discovery. Imagine the shock of finding a home turned into a bloodbath, signs of a violent struggle everywhere. And to make matters even more chilling, the murder weapon, a broken paring knife, was still embedded in Carol's neck.
The brutality of the attack certainly suggests a personal motive. This wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. And here's a detail from the podcast that really makes you think. 3 unspent bullets were found near the front door. Why didn't the attacker simply shoot Carol? It's a curious detail that suggests a possible change of plans, or perhaps a more personal motive than initially suspected.
Now enter the husband, Cotton Thompson. He was a successful criminal defense lawyer, a seemingly respected member of the community. He arrived home, apparently shocked by the news, but there was something off about his behavior. He didn't immediately mention the numerous life insurance policies he'd taken out on Carol, totaling over $1 million, which would be the equivalent of about $10 million today.
His initial silence about those insurance policies is definitely a red flag, and his explanation for the excessive coverage, that he had a premonition about Carol's death, seems a little too convenient, don't you think?
It definitely raises questions about his sincerity. Was his grief genuine, or was he putting on an act? The investigation takes a turn into a real-life game of Clue. When the police uncover a stolen gun at the heart of it all, we're introduced to a string of colorful characters. Willard Ingram, who admitted to stealing the gun, Norman Mastrian, a former prizefighter with mob ties, and Dick Anderson, a down-on-his-luck veteran. And here's where it gets interesting. Each one turned informant, offering information in exchange for lighter sentences.
It's fascinating how these seemingly separate lives become intertwined, each choice leading to unintended consequences. The fact that each criminal was willing to betray the others to save themselves speaks volumes about the nature of loyalty, or lack thereof, in the criminal underworld.
The tension really ramps up when Dick Anderson, the most unlikely hitman you can imagine, confesses to killing Carol. He reveals a chilling contract murder plot orchestrated by Norman Mastrian. And get this, the final piece of the puzzle falls into place when investigators discover that Cotton Thompson had previously represented Norman Mastrian as a client.
That revelation is a game changer. It directly connects Cotton to the man who hired Dick Anderson to kill Carol. Suddenly, we see a man driven by greed, willing to sacrifice his wife's life for financial gain. The fact that he was a criminal defense lawyer adds another layer of complexity. He knew the law, and he thought he could use that knowledge to his advantage.
And just when you think it can't get any more shocking, Anderson drops another bombshell. He claims that Cotton had planned to murder Carol's father as well, all to inherit even more money. It's mind-boggling how far some people are willing to go for wealth and power.
This alleged plan to murder Carol's father reveals the depth of Cotton's alleged depravity. It raises questions about the limits of ambition and the corrosive power of greed. Could anyone we know be capable of such calculated cruelty?
It's a sobering thought. So we have this complex web of relationships, a brutal murder, and a husband who appears increasingly suspicious. But remember, this is 1963. Forensic science wasn't as advanced as it is today. The police had to rely heavily on good old-fashioned detective work. piecing together clues and following leads that often led to dead ends.
It really highlights the challenges investigators faced back then. They had to be incredibly resourceful, relying on witness testimonies, physical evidence, and a bit of luck to unravel the truth.
What stands out to you about their process in this case?
Well, the podcast points out several lucky breaks that proved crucial to the investigation. For instance, remember the stolen gun? The police held a televised press conference showing the broken pieces of the pistol grip, hoping someone would recognize it.
And it worked. A viewer called in with a tip that led them right to Willard Ingram.
It just goes to show the power of community involvement in solving crimes. Sometimes, the smallest detail, a seemingly insignificant observation, can make all the difference.
And then there's that chain of criminals turning informant, each one leading the police closer to the truth. It's like a domino effect, one confession leading to another.
It's a classic example of how self-preservation can motivate people to do unexpected things. They were willing to betray their associates to save themselves.
And in a strange way, their betrayals ultimately helped bring justice for Carol.
That's the paradox of criminal investigations, isn't it? Sometimes the path to justice requires navigating through murky ethical waters.
But let's not forget the discovery of the murder weapon itself. Finding that gun, discarded in the woods after weeks of searching, must have been a huge victory for the investigators.
It absolutely was. That gun connected all the key players and provided irrefutable physical evidence of the crime.
And then there's the almost unbelievable story of how Dick Anderson ended up back in Minnesota. A reporter tipped him off that the police were looking for him, which prompted him to flee to Arizona.
And that same reporter inadvertently revealed Anderson's location to the police, leading to his arrest. It's almost as if the reporter was an unwitting pawn in a larger game, unknowingly facilitating the course of justice.
It really underscores the unpredictable nature of life, doesn't it? Even the most carefully planned schemes, there's always an element of chance, of human error, that can derail everything. And in Cotton Thompson's case, it seems fate wasn't on his side.
The investigation culminated in a dramatic trial, where Cotton Thompson, a skilled defense attorney, faced off against the prosecution. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious onlookers, everyone eager to see how this seemingly upstanding lawyer would defend himself against such serious charges.
The prosecution painted a pretty damning picture of Cotton, portraying him as a cold, calculating man driven by greed and a desire to be free of Carol. They emphasized those excessive life insurance policies, his alleged infidelity, and that chilling remark he allegedly made to his mistress, "Just give me 11 months."
Their strategy was clear: establish a motive. They needed to convince the jury that Cotton had a compelling reason to want Carol dead.
And they had a key witness to support their case, Dick Anderson, the self-confessed hitman.
Anderson's testimony was truly riveting. He described the attack in graphic detail, recounting how Carol fought back with incredible ferocity, even managing to escape the bathtub where he'd initially tried to stage her death as an accident.
Can you imagine the emotions in that courtroom as he described her desperate struggle for survival?
It must have been incredibly powerful. His account humanized Carol, reminding everyone that she wasn't just a name in a case file, but a real person, a loving mother whose life was tragically cut short.
And it also highlighted the alleged cold-blooded nature of Cotton's alleged plan. He allegedly was willing to have his wife brutally murdered in their home, knowing their children were just upstairs, completely unaware of the horror unfolding below.
And remember, Anderson also testified about the alleged plan to murder Carol's father. That detail was particularly damaging to the defense, because it suggested that Cotton was motivated by more than just money. It painted a picture of a man willing to eliminate anyone who stood in the way of his alleged inheritance.
But Cotton wasn't going down without a fight. His defense team tried to discredit the prosecution's witnesses, highlighting their criminal pasts, and the fact that they were testifying in exchange for lighter sentences.
It was a classic defense strategy. Attack the credibility of the witnesses to create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors.
They also tried to downplay the significance of those life insurance policies. Their argument was that Cotton was simply eccentric when it came to insurance. They pointed to his excessive coverage on his home and car as evidence of this supposed quirk.
But that argument seems pretty weak, wouldn't you say? How many people are genuinely eccentric when it comes to insuring their spouse's life for millions of dollars?
It does seem like a stretch. And what's even more interesting is that Cotton took the stand himself, denying any involvement in Carol's murder.
That must have been a dramatic moment in the trial. Did his testimony sway the jury?
Not really. His testimony was brief, lacking in detail, and ultimately unconvincing. He couldn't provide a plausible explanation for his actions. for his connection to Norman Mastrian, or for those damning life insurance policies.
It seems his legal skills, so effective in defending others, weren't enough to overcome the weight of the evidence against him.
Exactly. And after 26 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder.
It must have been an intense wait for everyone involved. Carol's family and friends have been seeking justice for over a year.
I can't even imagine the range of emotions they must have experienced.
The verdict was a vindication for them, a confirmation that the system worked, their loved one's life, her memory, had not been forgotten.
And Cotton, the man who allegedly orchestrated this elaborate and brutal scheme, the man who allegedly betrayed his family in such a horrific way, was finally held accountable for his alleged actions. He was sentenced to life in prison.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Even those who seem to have it all, wealth, status, a successful career, can be driven to commit terrible acts.
It's a sobering reminder that appearances can be deceiving. But the story doesn't end with Cotton's conviction. What happened to the other players in this twisted game?
Well, Norman Mastrian and Dick Anderson were also tried and convicted of first-degree murder. They both received life sentences as well. Justice was served on all fronts.
But the scars of this crime run deep, especially for Cotton's children. They lost their mother in the most brutal way imaginable, and then had to face the reality that their own father was allegedly responsible.
The psychological impact of such a trauma is immense. The sense of betrayal, the loss of trust, the shattering of their world. It's a burden no child should have to bear.
The podcast shares a poignant quote from Jeff, Cotton's son, who years later said, "It's very hard for a child to have a parent in prison." He struggled with the guilt of unknowingly playing a role in his mother's death. And even after Cotton was paroled, they never really had a relationship.
Jeff's words are heartbreaking. They speak to the profound and lasting impact of this tragedy.
This case also raises important questions about societal norms of the time. Remember, this was the early 1960s, a period when women were often expected to prioritize their roles as wives and mothers above all else.
It was a time when the image of the perfect housewife was pervasive. Women were often expected to be content with their roles as wives and mothers, even if they had other aspirations.
And the podcast touches on how Carol confided in a friend that she was attracted to Kenneth Moran, but ultimately affirmed her love for her husband and children.
It suggests she may have felt conflicted, torn between societal expectations and her own desires. It's a reminder that behind the seemingly perfect facades of the time, many women were struggling with unfulfilled dreams and a lack of control over their own lives.
It's heartbreaking to think about what might have been different if Carol had lived in a time when women had more choices, more freedom to pursue their own paths.
Absolutely. It makes you reflect on how societal norms can impact individual lives, sometimes with tragic consequences.
This case is also a stark reminder that evil can lurk beneath the surface of even the most seemingly respectable individuals. Cotton Thompson, a successful lawyer, a churchgoer, a seemingly devoted family man. He was ultimately revealed to be a master manipulator, driven by greed and a callous disregard for human life.
It challenges our assumptions about who we can trust, reminding us that appearances can be deceiving.
And you know what else is fascinating about this case? It demonstrates the power of circumstantial evidence in unraveling a complex conspiracy. The prosecution, through meticulous detective work and a few fortunate breaks, was able to piece together a compelling case that ultimately led to Cotton's conviction.
It highlights the importance of thorough investigation and the idea that even seemingly small details can be crucial in solving a case. It was the accumulation of all those little pieces of the puzzle, the connections that initially seemed unrelated, that ultimately revealed the truth.
So as we reach the end of our deep dive into the Carol Thompson case, what are some of the key takeaways for you?
For me, it reinforces the idea that truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. It underscores the significance of seeking justice even when the path is long and winding. And it highlights the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to find strength and hope even in the face of unimaginable tragedy.
And it leaves us with some important questions to ponder. Could a tragedy like this have been prevented? What signs might we miss in our own lives, in our own communities? That could indicate someone is in danger or capable of such darkness.
It's a reminder to be observant, to trust our intuition, and to be aware that even in the most seemingly idyllic settings, darkness can exist. We need to be vigilant, to look out for one another, and to speak up when we see something that doesn't seem right.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. It's a story that stays with you long after you've heard the details. It reminds us that the past is never truly past, that its echoes continue to resonate in the present, And it challenges us to create a world where tragedies like Carol's are less likely to occur. A world where everyone feels safe and empowered to live their lives to the fullest. And that's it for our deep dive today. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell a friend.